now that we are recording, thank you so much, Eli. You totally get most favored student status for at least 30 seconds or so. And for those who are not here, they are eternally grateful. So because I didn't record all of that, if you need any extra review stuff and have not yet taken the test, go find that primary study guide folder, and there are clips of previous years of me teaching various topics so that you can go find it, like the definition of the characteristics of money, like not yours to give, like a recap of widgets are us, some of the penny candy things that you might want to know, and maybe I didn't explain clearly this time around, or didn't get to this time around. Particularly Knotgrass Unit 5. I did a lousy job 2 weeks ago. I kind of glossed over a lot of that stuff. So there are previous years that I spent more time on it. I'm not going to go back over it today, but I would recommend going and maybe watching my Pearls of Wisdom from the previous year. If you got questions about margin and marginal propensity to consume and opportunity cost and substitute goods and economy of scale versus economy of scope. Scale meaning more of, heavy scope meaning the number of products, things like that. I'm going to do that. But today we are starting in on Unit 6 and how markets work. And memory serves, I wanted to start with, yes, we're starting with a Hudsucker proxy. Yay! I love that. So we're starting with some fun today. Y'all ready for a little bit of fun before we get into the Knotgrass stuff? And we'll do Hudsucker proxy. We're going to Knotgrass Unit 6. We're going to talk about the market and human values and this guy called Ludwig von Mises. And oh my gosh, I went down such a great rabbit trail last night with Google's AI, I guess. I was looking something up and we went down this great, I got all great stuff related to Ludwig von Mises and the movie Silk Road. It's a dark movie, and it's not necessarily youth appropriate or adult appropriate for that matter, but it's about the real life story of the guy who created a dark web, the dark website called Silk Road, and he founded it based on Ludwig von Mises' economics principles, and he was one of the early adopters of Bitcoin. For exactly that reason, that to keep the free market free and outside of government control. And it was a philosophical activity, more, a political protest, philosophical activity, more than it was, an intentional, criminally designed to get around the law, to break the law thing. Anyway, we'll get there. But I had a great, I was nerding out. I am such a nerd, y'all. It's crazy. And then we're going to get to Noah's Castle. And if we don't get to Noah's Castle today, we'll catch up with it next week. But I'd like to get to at least 9 and 10 today, maybe 11 through 13. And if it's been a while since you've looked at Noah's Castle, make sure you do that for next week as well. And I think most of you have not yet started the test, so you've got another week before that is due, and reach out to me if you've got any questions. So with that, let me see. I had it open earlier, and now I've got to find it. Give me just one moment I had it. I know where I had it. Hold on. Sorry, I thought I was prepared, and apparently I am not. And so we're going to find it here. I'm going to share it here. Adobe Connect, Economics 2026 Week 5. That was last week's. Consumer Math Economics. Where the heck is it? Shucks. Too many things open on my computer, and if I can't find it, we'll have to move on. But I really, really, really wanted to show it to you, and it's in a Schoology folder. If I could only find the Schoology folder. All right, there's live class resources, week 6, online resources, week 6. I bet it's in week 7. Okay. Forgive me. Talk amongst yourselves. Discuss. Rhode Island is neither a road nor an island. Discuss. There it is. It's in week 7, online resources, right where it's supposed to be. Saw it. Hopefully I didn't just sit here watching it by myself. All right. Hopefully that was fun too. That's a fun. That is a parent, I think, a parent approved movie. You can watch that without fear. Yes. Okay. He was really good at that out of nowhere, wasn't he? I would not be able to, even at that age, I would not have been able to pick up that hula hoop and do that out of nowhere. But again, call him a plant, whatever. That's why it's a spoof. Okay. High supply and low demand. Exactly. So the toy store, Jonathan, you got it right there. High supply, low demand meant low prices. The toy store owner had all of these hula hoops in stock. Nobody wanted anything. And he kept lowering the price and lowering the price, hoping somebody would buy it at some point. And that goes to the economic principle that producers can make whatever they want, and they can try, and retailers can try and sell it for whatever price they want to set on it. But if there's no demand, they won't make any money. They can't make any money. The consumers are the one that drive that drive the market, that drive what people want and what gets produced. Producers can produce anything they want. Retailers can try and sell at any price, but it will only sell at the price that consumers are willing to pay for it. Oh, great question, Eli. What was the thing that kept spitting out the paper? That was the stock ticker. So they're watching the stock of the company on the market, on the stock market. And again, so he was disappointed because he was expecting this to be the product that would increase the value of the company and bring it back to success. The shareholders behind the scenes were hoping for it to do exactly what it was doing in the beginning, which was tanking. So he's sitting there, depressed that the company is tanking and he's going to get fired and all the things. And that's his secretary watching what the stock prices are doing. And then all of a sudden people start buying the hula hoop and the stock prices, the value of the company start going up again. Yes, and so Adele, that was absolutely related to the price increases. People start buying it. The price of the value of the company was related to people buying the hula hoops. Right, and so low demand, low price, excellent. And then of course we saw as soon as all those kids wanted it, there was more demand than there was supply. And so all of a sudden now, from $1.79 starting point, the retailer realized that he had a corner on the market, kind of like penny candy and the bubblegum example, or the record store, well, either one, record store and bubblegum example. There's only a limited amount of supply and lots of people want the thing. And so now all of a sudden the price is $3.99, not $1.79. And that goes to the concept, the second big concept of our economics, second trimester, is going to be on supply and demand. So if you think about the first part of our course, the first trimester was all about inflation. And we did Noah's Castle and we did penny candy. And the first part of Knotgrass was all about inflation and the value of money. The second part, the major pinnacle, cornerstone, principle, whatever, of economics is now about supply and demand. So that's where we're going today. We're going to talk about the market. We're going to talk about Knotgrass, and I've got a supply and demand cheat sheet here, because what I have found is that supply and demand can unintentionally become confusing. It seems like it's really clear, and we all think we're really clear in understanding it, but then it's really easy to mix it up. So I've given a cheat sheet that we'll go through here in just a few minutes to help you sort through what happens to price when supply changes, what happens to price when demand changes, what happens to demand when price changes, what happens to supply when price changes. So like all like it's teeter-totter, it's a fulcrum. And so when one thing changes, what happens to the other things? But there are three components: supply, demand, and price. And depending on which one you start with, in this, if we think this is the cause, price is the starting point, what happens to supply and demand? If we think that supply is the starting point, what happens to price and demand? I think so. Again, we can get convoluted when we just talk about it. So I've got a special thing for you, a cheat sheet for you. But let's go now. That gives us the context for where we're going with Not Grass Unit 6. By the way, before I forget, this week's homework coming up, we've got some fun video clips of Mary Poppins and a little bit more on the monetary system, which is going to be fun. Mary Poppins teaches the monetary system. Yay for Mary Poppins. And what you need to know is you only have a couple of sections, and we've got more Noah's Castle and some penny candy. Unit 7 of Not Grass. Remember, we already did one lesson from Unit 7 last or 2 weeks ago as part of because it went along with the penny candy stuff on what is money. So this and one lesson we're just skipping completely because I don't like how Mr. Notgrass explained it in this particular version of the book. But the other 3 are for this week. So there's only 3 lessons of Unit 7 for Notgrass this week. So a little less there, but you've got a test to do. Projects, some of you have done your projects, some of you haven't. Those can be due, again, pace yourself, however you need to pace yourself. But with that, we're moving on to Not Grass Unit 6. So the theme of Not Grass Unit 6 is markets. What are markets? And we're going to talk about how markets work. We're going to talk about supply and demand, how much something costs, why markets change, and when markets fail. So lesson 26 has a whole bunch of these. There's a whole bunch of definitions in this particular unit. That's why it's our textbook, right? And I want you to think about the term market. To market, you know, off we go. Oh gosh, I can't even think of never mind. The Mother Goose rhyme. To market, to buy a fresh pig, to market, jiggity jig. There we go. It's been a while since I had little kids. Do any of you remember that? Please tell me I'm not just being a complete fool. Play with me here. Talk to me. Talk to me, Goose. Talk to me. Oh, I'm in rare form today. It's the tea, isn't it? Oh, you never heard that? To market, to buy a fresh pig. To market, jiggity jig. Something like that. I'm old. But yeah. Mother Goose rhymes. Sesame Street and Mother Goose rhymes, or Barney and Mother Goose rhymes. I don't know. A market is any place that things are let me hear, anywhere sellers offer goods and services and buyers purchase them. Let me have the direct definition in front of me. That's so much better. So you think about a grocery store is a market where the grocer sells food and drinks and vegetables and meat and butter and milk and bread and batteries and whatever, and buyers purchase them. That's a standard market. But we have other kinds of markets as well, intangible markets. For example, we talk about the real estate market, and that is not necessarily a place where people go, but a geographic location. The real estate market in Savannah, Georgia right now is considered a buyer's market. And that means the inventory for sale, there's more inventory for sale than there are buyers. And so buyers have their pick and choose. They don't have to take whatever price is available, let's say. They can pick and choose. I can take this house on the street or that house on the street. And they have the power in terms of what they offer the price for. But the real estate market is a place where an intangible place where people buy and sell real estate. Or the stock market. There are tangible physical locations like the New York Stock Exchange where people buy and sell, stock brokers sell and buy on behalf of consumers like you and me, stocks or commodities or other things. But there's also kind of the intangible representation of the stock market, which means the general temperature, the general environment of which financial market in which people buy and sell stocks, money, loans, houses, other kinds of financial vehicles, if that makes sense. The car market down here in Savannah, Georgia, they're more a seller's market, for example, would be there's a lot of demand, a lot of people want a car or want a home, and the sellers therefore have all the power because they've got something to sell that's a limited resource and they can claim their price. In a real estate market that's a seller's market, for example, that's when you get bidding wars. If I go to sell my mother's house in a seller's market, hopefully we get 4 or 5 or 6 different people who all want that one house because there are very few houses for sale in her neighborhood. And she might be asking $500,000 for it and end up getting offers for $550,000 or $600,000. That's a seller's market, but it's still a virtual representation of place where people sell, people buy, sell goods and services, and people buy. The next question: capital goods, producer goods, consumer goods, and durable goods. This was a little convoluted in Unit 5. I want to say it was lesson 25 when we talked about capital and capital goods and material resources versus production resources. In that particular example, production resources would be something that are used to make, like the machinery used to make a product, whereas material resources would have been the components that go into the product. Let's say I've got a placemat here in front of me. The fabric to make this placemat would be a material resource. The sewing machine used to sew it and put it together would be a production resource. So that was a little unclear in Unit 5, just for what it's worth. Here we're talking about the different kinds of, it's just a little bit different. So capital goods are things for which people make a major investment and they use to produce other items. So here we're talking about capital goods like the machinery, like the factory resources, like the sewing machines. As opposed to producer goods, so capital goods are like big investments, things that could take multiple years to pay off. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Whereas producer goods are items such as the tools and raw materials that people use to make other products. So the tools, the scissors that I'm using, and or the materials that we're using to make other things, like the fabric. So it's a little different than the explanation back in Unit 5 in terms of what we're referring to as producer goods versus material resources over there. I don't want to confuse you. I just want to highlight the difference. Consumer goods are what you and I purchase, end users purchase. Clothing would be consumer goods. Well, clothing sometimes can be more longer time, but things that are meant to be used in a relatively short period of time and then have to be replaced. I would put clothing under consumer goods. I don't quite know how economists classify clothing, but things that are meant to last, used up and be consumed. A ballpoint pen would be a consumer good. Difference being durable goods, the fourth item there, durable goods, are goods intended to last a long time. Cars would be considered durable goods. Things that consumers buy but that we don't replace regularly. In my mind, that's why I say clothing would be more of a consumer good, because clothing isn't meant to last forever anymore. We buy clothing off of Amazon or Temu, however one pronounces that, that's meant to last a season and then be thrown out and recycled and repeated. Lily, you said your dad got to go to the Chicago Exchange. and where they trade the S&P 500. That must have been so cool to see pictures. I imagine that must have been really, really, really cool. I have a vague memory of a field trip to New York City when I was, again, late 1970s, maybe early 1980s, way long ago, getting to do a field trip to go into the observatory of the New York Stock Exchange. And I must have been pretty young because you would think that would have made more of an impression, but fascinating to me, absolutely fascinating to me. I have heard now, though, that there isn't actually, that the doors to get into there are now secret, that there's no visible way to get into that building anymore, probably for security purposes. That makes sense. It is the heart of our economy. But yeah. So what are those? So imperfect. So let's talk about imperfect competition and perfect competition. And what else do I want to make sure? Imperfect competition. Imperfect competition takes place when there's a limited number of suppliers or buyers, and either one of them can have significant effect on price. So think about in a regular market, a perfect market, in a balanced market, you have any number of producers and any number of consumers, or any number of employers and any number of employees, and it's relatively balanced. And so, no one employer can charge slave labor wages because all of these potential employees have multiple opportunities to work for different places. And so the market balances what the pay is going to be based on what the potential employees are willing to accept. Yes. Or there's multiple grocery stores or multiple gas stations. So if there's only one gas station, they might be able to charge $20 a gallon for gasoline because they're the only game in town. And you either pay our price gouging prices or you don't get gasoline. That would be an imperfect competition. One, monopoly or something like that over here, and we have to take what we can get. Or when all of the consumers have it goes both ways. There's only one buyer, only one person who's going to buy. So the U.S. government is one of those. The only person who can buy a military jet Boeing military aircraft might be the U.S. government. And so pretty much it's the government that gets to set the price for what they're willing to pay for a Boeing aircraft jet fighter. Again, that's not my area of expertise, so I'm probably botching that example. But if there's only one or very few either buyers or sellers, that creates imperfect competition, and it breaks the natural flow of supply and demand and the natural flow of a market economy. How does that sometimes happen? That happens when, let's say, all of the gas station owners get together, or all of the employers get together illegally and agree to price fix. And the biggest example we've seen, one that the book uses quite frequently, is OPEC back in the 1970s, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries. And it was primarily, but not entirely, Middle East and South American oil producing countries. And they got together, they formed a cartel, which is an illegal, or not necessarily illegal, but a group of providers that engage in collusion, a secret cooperation for dishonest purpose, to price fix the amount of oil being produced. Actually, what they did is they limited the amount of oil that they agreed to produce, which then, the very limited supply of oil, jacked up the price so that they could all charge more and make more profit because they held all the cards. Cartels are generally illegal, considered illegal, or at least ones that engage in collusion. And there's some strict laws, at least in the United States, about things like monopolies and collusion and price fixing. And that would be an example of when a broken market, an imperfect competition, when they've all agreed to jack up their prices together and hold the consumers over the barrel, or when we've all agreed to not work unless we get $20 an hour. And we're basically forcing employers, if you want to hire us, you've got to pay us this amount. And when it's very hard. You think about apartheid in South Africa, or the Cuban embargo. It's very hard to keep a group of people in agreement. And that was the downfall of OPEC in the 70s. I mean, OPEC still exists, but that got broken eventually when the individual countries got a little greedy and said, I don't care that we all agreed we'd only produce 20 barrels of oil. It's so profitable right now that we're going to produce 21 or 22 or 23. And over time, then, I'm making that number up, but easy numbers. Over time, then, the supply increased, and so the price came down, and they started backfighting and all the things. So you need to know collusion, you need to cartel, you need to understand the concept of a boycott is one ways that consumers have power over the big companies. But again, boycotts are sound great in theory and are much harder to actually create an impact. We think about some of the big boycotts over the years. People boycotted Hobby Lobby. People boycotted. They boycotted watching the Super Bowl. People will boycott for all kinds. People boycott Chick-fil-A, and it's hard to get a mass group of people to all agree to the same behavior in enough volume that will actually affect the pocketbooks, the bottom line of these big companies. It's political grandstanding, but it's really hard to make that a meaningful effect. Or again, that comes down to political bias. But if I remember, the owners of those companies were they are conservative right wing and probably supporting anti-abortion laws, or not wanting to provide health insurance that covered abortion. I can no longer remember what. It's funny, I can no longer remember what it was, but they were generally more liberal, boycotting conservative, the actions of the conservative owners. And my challenge with that, part of my grandstand on that, is I may or may not agree with the political leanings or the religious leanings of the owner of a company. And I may not agree with the philosophy of certain companies, whether or not that's, the flip side of that was when Budweiser chose to have a transgender person as their spokesperson for their beer, and everybody wanted to boycott Budweiser beer because that was un-American. We didn't, whatever. You take both sides of a moral issue. You've got companies who support that, promote that, do something about that. And the challenge with that is it really doesn't hurt the big companies' bottom line very much. It hurts the people who own the distributors in the community. It hurts the individual Chick-fil-A unit owner. It hurts the profitability of the Hobby Lobby store when they start laying people off. So the ripple effect is, maybe we feel like it serves them right for working for an evil company, Budweiser, Hobby Lobby. Maybe we feel that serves them right. I don't think that's very compassionate. And I don't think it really affects the change that we want it to affect the change. Having a real boycott is much harder to actually implement and execute than the idea and the virtue signaling of that either way. Yes, I agree with all of you. Right, you have a friend who's never been to Chick-fil-A because her parents don't like the organizations that the owners support. And that's fair. That is totally their right. I choose to not spend my money in certain places as well, whose philosophies don't align with mine. But I don't also believe that it really makes a difference. Doesn't mean I shouldn't do it, but I don't think it really makes a difference economically. And the other thing that often comes up is sometimes what we talk about is not the same thing as what we actually do. When we talk about public, yes, I can make anything about economics, right? Go back to Unit 5 and public choice theory. That's about what do consumers want? What do they want? What do they actually choose? What can they afford? What do they actually choose? And I can't remember what the fourth thing is because I don't have it in front of me. But sometimes what we say we want is not what we actually end up doing in the moment. And sometimes the idea of a boycott is the same thing. I may say, I don't want to support Chinese manufacturing, and I don't want to support, evil Chinese government policies, and I only want to buy American. And therefore, I should not shop at Walmart or Amazon because they're importing, we're supporting the Chinese government, right? I may say that. The reality is, however, I have to look at my microeconomic decisions may be at odds with my macroeconomic philosophies. And when push comes to shove, and I have 4 kids who needs back to school clothes, and life is really expensive, and I'm a single parent, I'm probably going to, I may compromise my philosophical principles and end up shopping at Walmart because I can make my dollars stretch farther and my kids need shoes. And so even though I may be saying one thing and I want to buy American, when it actually comes to my dollars, I may not be able to spend $70 on an American made pair of shoes when I can spend $15 on a Chinese made pair of shoes times 4. Does that make sense? So that's the long and involved discussion about markets and why do we make the decisions we make. We're going back to economic freedom versus economic security. Remember that in a market economy, it's based on the idea that consumers have choices and producers have choices, and we've got the economic freedom to try things, do things, agree, make things happen. But it's at the risk of and the sacrifice of security. I am free to try and launch a business, and I'm free to fail and end up living under a bridge in a market economy. In a command economy, socialist philosophy, the idea here is to protect everybody, make sure that nobody ends up left behind, that everybody has a chicken in their pot and bread in the oven. Everybody has something, that nobody ends up living under a bridge. But in order to make sure that happens, it also means we're limiting the amount of risk that we're letting people take. I'm telling you, you're going to be a garbage person. I'm telling you, you're going to be a doctor. No, you can't go off to college and pursue a degree in underwater basket weaving because we don't believe that will be productive. And you're smart enough that you should be a doctor. Actually, I had a story of someone from a Scandinavian country that's a little bit more socialist, and they were violinists and were not able to pursue music because the government program, their education plan that was paid for by the government, insisted that they needed to go and get a medical degree because that's what they were supposed to do. They were qualified for. So the command economy helps protect against some risk of living under a bridge, in theory, but it comes at the cost of our economic freedom. So 3 indicators of economic freedom when we look at a market economy is the kinds of goods and services available, and not just the kinds, the variety, but the quantity. Again, during the Cold War, we got people who emigrated, defected from the Iron Curtain, iron block countries, and came to the West, and they were astonished at the size of grocery stores, the amount of products on the shelves, the amount of product available to just go and be able to purchase, and not just the amount, but the different, there's 10 kinds of hot sauce, 20 kinds of hot sauce, as opposed to 1, and there might be 2 bottles, as opposed to 100 bottles. Yeah. So I think we take for granted sometimes, and Susanna, I don't know if you're still here, but I don't know what that looks like in India, but I imagine that's a very different experience there as it is here than it is here in the United States, where we can go into triple-decker grocery stores and 100 different varieties of hot sauce and multiple bottles of each. So the kinds and amounts of goods and services available is one indicator of economic freedom. the ability of consumers to obtain those goods, how easy it is for us to access them, and the ability for producers to be able to bring new and improved goods and services to the market, like a hula hoop, and do not need permission to do so. So the question in the book, and I don't have time to really sit here and discuss it right now because it's time for our break, but what do you believe is the fairest economic system for the poor and why? Knotgrass proposes, and I agree with, that generally speaking, go back to the adage, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And to mix those metaphors, the philosophy here is that when we provide opportunity for poor people to be able to work, to try things, to be creative, to find jobs, to follow their path, it is actually more opportunity and fairer for the poor, because the rising tide can raise all ships, than a command economy where everybody gets a little bit and there's not enough to go around. Think about the example with the grades again. When we share all the grades, the average grade went way down. So yeah, everybody may have a chicken for their pot and a loaf of bread in the oven, but that's it. No potato chips, no soda, no hot sauce. Whoops. Oh gosh, I missed all your comments here. Right. Okay, there we go. We had, right. You were talking about Chick-fil-A there, overrated, underwater. Oh yeah. Okay. So Lily, I'm so sorry. That again, I'm old. That used to be the default, for a completely useless college degree. You know, if you're going off and wasting money and wasting your time and energy getting educated in a useless skill, like learning how to weave baskets underwater. That's still a term I use. What would be the equivalent now of a completely ridiculously frivolous, unnecessary skill set? I don't know. I have to come up with a modern example. Y'all can help me come up with a modern example. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and take a quick break here. I am going to run out of time today because I'm in the groove and I'm loving it. But I'm a nerd. But anyway, I'm gonna heat my tea up. You're gonna heat your beverage of choice up or get a snack, and we'll be right back. Keep going. Resume recording. There we are. Okay. And we're moving on to lesson 27. So again, there's a whole bunch of terms in lesson 27. Markets do what they do. You know what? I'm going back to 26. I've got something highlighted in my book here because I do use yellow highlighter. It says, no method of distributing goods and services satisfies all the wants of all the people, but the best method of distribution is the one that helps the most people. Oh, the best method of distribution that helps the most people is the price system. Let me read that again. No method of distributing goods and services satisfies all the wants of the people, but the best method of distribution that helps the most people is the price system. That dynamic that makes a free market work is supply and demand. The dynamic that makes a free market work is supply and demand. The chief factor in creating supply and demand is the prices at which producers offer goods and services. So depending on the price, that affects supply and demand. If you understand markets, supply and demand, and the effect of prices, you will understand a great deal about economics. So that's where we're going. That is the whole thing here. And we're going to figure out how supply and demand happens. Here we have a farmer's market in Portland, Oregon. And do markets, so the last question there is, do markets exploit the poor? And of course, socialism philosophy would say that the capitalism exploits we got the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and the bourgeoisie is always taking advantage of and exploiting the poor. And in fact, Knotgrass here, we talked about in the last slide, Knotgrass here is promoting the idea that command economies actually create more poverty, and the best way to help the most number of people is the price system, the free market system, because of the opportunities that creates. And I believe, my personal philosophy believe is, yes, when we want to find a mix of socialism and capitalism, going back to Jonathan's point before the break, is that there is a sweet spot that's not all or nothing. The extremes on both sides of that spectrum, fully free market and fully command economy, are extremes. And there is a sweet spot that I believe is closer to free market than it is to command economy, but not necessarily 50-50. And I think it leans that direction. And that's something that I would call compassionate capitalism. How can we provide the most opportunity for the most people and still provide a safety net that's not that's voluntary, that's not necessarily government mandated? How about our charitable? How about the church? How about those of us with compassionate hearts earning all we can earn and saving all we can save, thank you, John Wesley, so that we can give all that we can give and provide that safety net for those who legitimately cannot help themselves, without creating and enabling those who are learning to work the system. I don't want to use the lazy word because that's a charged term. Some people are just lazy, but more often than not, when we see people being accused of being lazy, that's a gross generalization and not necessarily fair. So I don't want to enable, but I want to be able to provide support for those who really truly need some assistance. I have been the beneficiary of people who've come out of the woodwork to help support me in times where I was down on my luck. I went through a very serious life crisis where I was literally left without most of my belongings. Did not have beds, did not have sheets and towels, did not have silverware. I had a couple of my lifelong, I had a couple of family heirloom type things. So I didn't lose everything, but I didn't have any of the day-to-day stuff. And people came out of the woodwork, and my neighbors gave me a whole living room set because I didn't have a living room set. That's the kind of charity and compassionate opportunities that I think we as a community should be supplying to each other. But that I shouldn't be expecting the government to take care of me in those circumstances either. Aaron, I love that. As a professional freeloader, I can't say that around you. Yes, exactly. We avoid the L word. Okay, let me move on. Oh my gosh, I'm just having so much fun, and clearly that's it. So anyway, that's supply and demand. So we're going to go on to here. I'm not going to actually explain the Knotgrass version from the book here, but here's the terms we need to know. We need to understand supply. We need to understand what are the determinants of supply, what determines how much supply is possible. He talks about the law of supply, then demand. What are the determinants of demand? What are the components that make up demand? How do we determine how much demand there is? The law of demand. And then there's this law of supply and demand. So Knotgrass has one approach to this. Uncle Eric has another, so we're going to get to that in the next slide. The question really becomes, and one of the real big economic questions, and different schools of thought, different economic philosophies really come first of when you need to kickstart an economy. How many of you have ever played like SimCity? Or, I guess even Minecraft is about creating new societies from scratch. I think there's some other like video games and such, or the board games that do that for, Civilization, or the Game of Life, maybe. Not the Game of Life. Animal Crossing. Okay, I'll have to look for that. But where you basically start from scratch and you get to play God, and you've got an agrarian society, and somehow you have to figure out how to civilize and make it work. And that's what these philosophers were basically doing, whether it was 17th century or 1,000 years ago, or 20th century. Understanding how economics works. And one of the big questions is, when you need to stimulate an economy, when you need to create a new economy, starting from scratch, let's say after Katrina, or colonizing the moon, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, supply or demand? And you have this guy, one of the philosophers named John Baptiste Say, who his philosophy of all of this, and it comes down to Say's law, if you want to kickstart the economy, start with production, start with the supply, start the engine to creating something, products. And when products are out there, that in turn will create demand. We have to have something to buy. And if we're kickstarting the economy by buying supplies and paying workers to create something, then the providers of the supplies and the workers from their salaries will have resources to be able to go buy things, and that will then create the demand. So you got to produce something that people actually want, but start with the production side, and that will start the cycle rolling. Yes? And the interesting, that's what we're going to see here at the end of Noah's Castle, is how do you re-kickstart the economy when there are no jobs and there were no supplies. And, people there's plenty of demand out there and no supply. And there was demand because I need food. There wasn't necessarily demand in terms of they didn't have the resources to go buy food. Demand is not just because I want it. Demand is ability to buy it. Interesting. I have to go look for that. Animal Crossing is a command economy. And very, very interesting. I love you all, really, I do. Okay, so that's Jean Baptiste Say, that the economy starts with supply. On the other end of the spectrum, you have this guy named John Maynard Keynes, 20th century John Maynard Keynes, and Keynesian economics says that if you want to kickstart an economy, or you're in the middle of a recession, how do you get out of a recession or a depression? Is you kickstart demand, and you give people the opportunity to be able to purchase things, give them currency that has value to it, and that in turn, when people have money to spend, that will inspire production. And certainly that's what we have seen in the last 20 years. That's kind of what we saw in it's what we saw in the Great Recession, for sure. When we saw government stimulus checks, the idea being John Maynard Keynes' idea that if we give stimulus checks to all of American consumers, taxpayers, all American taxpayers, and we did this again during COVID, didn't we? Same principle. If we all got, or those of us who pay taxes got $600 or $1,200 money from the government, it's our taxpayer money that they were spending, and some of it was considered a rebate that we were given off of taxes we would owe next year. But if we all have like free money in our hands, we will go out and spend that money, which will create the ripple effect in the economy. And interestingly, what we saw back in 2008 is that didn't actually work as well as they had hoped. It goes back to the marginal propensity to consume, which was the example, one of the terms we had in Unit 5 as well, which is the number, or the percentage of which, when we get new money, how much of it do we spend versus how much of it do we save? And what we found during the 2008 recession is the government misjudged our marginal propensity to consume. And they assumed that we would take those $600 checks and spend them on, records and, I don't know, a new kayak on things that we would spend them in whatever way we wanted to spend them, go to the movies, whatever. And in fact, because we were so unsure of the economy and what was going on and whether we would have a job next month, what we found is more people ended up either paying off debt and putting that money into savings. And so for the first time in several decades, the US savings rate actually went up. It had been a negative number. And when we have a negative savings rate, what that means is that we're spending more money. We're not saving any money, and we're actually spending more money that we make, and we were going into debt. Average consumer debt in the United States is about $40,000. And family debt is about $40,000. And It means we owe $40,000 collectively, individually. And for the first time in a decade in that recession, that went down to like 38,000. We paid off some debt, but that meant we weren't spending the money that the government was putting out into the system. And interestingly, saving money and paying off debt is really good from a microeconomic perspective. It's much better for me to not have debt and not pay interest on my debt and to save money. So that's really good. If I get extra money, I need to make sure I'm saving it and not carrying any debt or paying off my debt, because that's the smart financial decision at a microeconomic level. On the other hand, that doesn't help the economy at all, because what helps the economy grow is when we spend money. Because when we spend money, the employees of the store we spend money at get paid, and the person who owns the store makes a profit, and the people who manufacture the things that are sold in the store make a profit, and the government makes a profit because they get sales tax and property taxes. And what's the engine of the economy comes from us spending money, producing and then spending money. So when we save, we're not helping the economy necessarily. And when we're paying off debt, it means we've already helped the economy previously when we spent money we didn't have. And now we're actually hurting the economy because there's too many dollars in circulation. And, we're paying, it's not helping. So those are the two pieces. I'm belaboring this a little bit, but what you believe about human nature and what you believe about what kickstarts the economy comes into play in terms of government policies, our government economists' policies and the Federal Reserve Bank policies about how to help the economy if we look like we're slipping towards a recession. Why did they hand out $600 checks both during the recession and during COVID to make sure that people were spending money somehow? Again, the preference is spending money in the United States, because when we're spending it on Amazon, that's not necessarily helping the U.S. economy. So again, using our dollars responsibly, it makes sense when we're talking about it in theory. The decisions we make, consumer choice theory, the decisions we actually make versus the things we say we want, often two different things. And we're going to come back to Jean-Baptiste Say in a little bit here, but I want you to be able to describe the difference between what does Say's law promote production, what does Keynesian economics promote demand. That will be important to know next time around. There we go. So let's hit this before I completely run out of time today. And if we have to get to Noah's Castle next week, we will. Maybe we'll get to it later today. So here we are. So there's two versions. So in Knotgrass, Unit 6, Lesson 27, where we are right now, he believes that the tipping point of the fulcrum is based on price. When price does something, what happens to supply and what doesn't? So if you think about a teeter-totter, the fulcrum point is based on price. What's the price doing? When the price of something goes up, supply goes up and demand goes down. So let me give you an example here. First example is we're going to use babysitters and we're going to use gasoline for all of these examples. When the price of babysitting goes up, what happens? Now, we're not talking about why does the price just go up. We're just talking about the price went up. And if the price goes up, if I can going rate for babysitters jumps from $8 an hour to $20 an hour, more people are going to want to take babysitting jobs. The supply of babysitters goes up. Here's the thing. I might not take, I've done my time. I might not babysit for $8 an hour, but I might consider it for $20 an hour, especially if I like the kids. So the higher the price, the more supply, the more incentive there is for supply. But on the other hand, parents may cut back on their date nights because now it costs almost three times as much to go out for a date night, and that may hurt their budget. They used to be able to budget, $16 for a 2-hour date, and now it's closer to it's $40 for a 2-hour date. They might do that once a week rather than twice a week now, or they might do it once a month instead of every week now. So price went up, supply wants to follow that. Demand wants to go down because we can't afford it. Price goes up, demand goes down. And let's take gasoline, same thing. Price of gasoline goes up because oil, and that's great, oil companies have more potential profit, so they start producing more oil, releasing more oil, and there's more supply. So when the supply goes there, that's great. Price of gasoline goes up. I find that they've got more incentive to want to sell oil when the price is up. However, when the price of gasoline goes up, consumers find ways to be a little bit more economic and spend less money on gas by driving less. Especially if I live out in the country and gasoline prices go up to $10 a gallon, I'm going to be really efficient about only making one trip into town each week, not going every day. There are times in Savannah where I can drive, 300 miles within a 10-mile radius, just over and over and over again. And when all my kids were in sports and stuff, I could drive 150 miles in a day and not go outside of a 10-mile radius of my house, just because it was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And when gas is expensive, I was going to try and be a little bit more careful about all the trips I was taking because I was filling my gas tank. It felt like every other day. It was ridiculous. Okay, so far so good. When price goes up, supply goes up, demand goes down. And I want you to hold these in your head. So when you think about price goes up, think about babysitting. When the babysitting price goes up, what happens to supply and demand? When gasoline price goes up, what happens to supply and demand? So here, come on to part 2 here. When the price goes down, supply is going to go down potentially because there's not as much profit potential, but demand is going to go up. So let's say now the going rate for babysitting drops from $20 an hour to $2 an hour. There's a lot fewer people willing to take babysitting jobs, and so there's fewer babysitters available. I am definitely not going to waste my time, unless I really, really, really like you as a gift. I'm not going to waste my time for $2 an hour babysitting someone else's screaming children. I might be willing to do it for $20 an hour. I'm not willing to do it for $2 an hour, right? And so that's why the example is crazy. But never say never, because in a tight economy, that might be what it becomes. But parents then are really excited about $2 an hour potentially, and so they might decide they can afford to go out more on more date nights. So there's going to be more demand from parents for babysitters because they can charge $2 an hour. And generally, if in a free market, that's going to be challenging. But let's say the government says you can only let's say the government artificially caps the price, like we saw in Noah's Castle, a price cap, and you can only charge $2 an hour for babysitting because anything else is price gouging. And so what happens is babysitters have no incentive to work for $2 an hour. Supply goes down. But parents still have money to spend, and so they want to be able to, it's only $2, now they want to be able to go out, right? Same thing for gasoline. When the price of gasoline goes down, oil companies don't have as much incentive to produce the oil. So they may cut back their production a little bit. They may hold more in reserve to save it till when the price goes back up. So the supply goes down, but consumers are less concerned and more willing to take family road trips because gas is cheap. So far, so good. Then here we come on. So far, yes, right? Any questions so far? So then we have the penny candy version, and there's 2 versions of the penny candy version. Penny candy takes the fulcrum where supply is in the middle and when the fulcrum where demand is in the middle, okay? So when supply is in the middle, you've got what happens to demand and what happens to price. So it's a different teeter-totter, different fulcrum. And so let's think about that. So when the supply goes up, let's say we found a new, lots of students, this is more real. That's why I like penny candy, because there's a lot more realistic example. So we've got lots of students home for the summer from college, whatever. They're out of school. There's lots of students available to work over the summertime. And babysitting or lawn mowing, either one. But now all of a sudden there's lots of people willing to work. And so parents have a lot of choice. And and Eli, you might agree that even you would babysit for $8 an hour. And Lily, you're like, oh no, I need to make some money for college, so I'm willing to babysit for $7 an hour. And Aaron decides he really, really needs to make money for the video console that you want to buy. So you're willing to work even for $6 an hour. And Anna, you're also trying to save money for something and need to make money. So you might also be willing to work for $6 an hour. So lots of you want to work. Lots of you want babysitting jobs. And so you bid yourselves down in order to get something, because $6 an hour is still better than $0 an hour. And you've got mom and dad yelling at you to say, you need to work. You lazy bums, you've got to work, and you better do something to make money. So all of you are competing for the same number of jobs, and lots of supply. The price you're going to get paid goes down. Same thing for oil. Supply of oil goes up all of a sudden because we found a new oil reserve in the Pacific Northwest somewhere. And so now, because there's so much more supply, the price is going to start dropping. Gasoline, including gasoline prices, start dropping because there's so much more available now. It's not as precious anymore. So think about the reverse example. Supply goes down. Summertime, lots of students available to work. New Year's Eve, nobody wants to babysit. Y'all want to go out and party, right? Because I know y'all are big party animals. So the supply for babysitters is really, really low. None of y'all want to work. Y'all want to go do something else. So supply decreases. The price goes way up. As a parent, if I want a babysitter on New Year's Eve, I can expect to pay $30 an hour. I will pay whatever it takes because I am with my little rugrats all day long. And New Year's Eve, gosh darn it, I want to go out and party hard. And I will pay whatever it takes to get someone else to babysit my kids on New Year's Eve. I mean, right? That's the example. I'll pay $30 an hour. Very limited supply. Price goes way up. Because my demand is there, my willingness to pay goes way up. If you're, and y'all, Anna, you don't really want to work on New Year's Eve, but you've decided that for $30 an hour, maybe you'll be willing to forego the party that you were planning on going to work for $30 an hour or $50 an hour. Low supply, you get to set your price almost as high as you want to. Price goes up. And then same thing. Let's say we have a hurricane in the Gulf, and all of a sudden that stops production of oil for a little while, and so therefore the supply of oil is going to go down temporarily. Or there's an oil embargo someplace overseas, and the supply decreases, and all of a sudden there isn't as much oil, including gasoline. The price starts going up. And the example, of course, is OPEC. When they choked off the supply of oil from the Middle East and South America, gasoline prices skyrocketed. Okay. And then last but not least, so what does that do then to demand? When demand goes up, more people with, so here's the thing. I got a raise. I have clients who got a raise. And interestingly, yes, because they have more disposable money, all of a sudden they want to go out more and pay more for babysitters. So they have a higher demand for babysitters than they used to. Let's say everybody in their neighborhood is all, let the good times roll. We've all gotten raises. The economy is good. We're feeling good. We have more disposable income. We want to celebrate. We want to use it. We want to go out as a couple. So more demand for babysitters. When demand goes up, the price goes up. More people want hula hoops, the price goes up. More people want to take road trips over the summer, and we always see this, the summer spike in gasoline prices, and that's because demand goes up. Demand for travel goes up. Demand for home heating oil in the winter goes up. Prices go up. If I buy home heating oil in the winter, I'm gonna buy it at a higher price than if I fill my tank in the summertime, because there's less demand in the summertime. So when demand goes down in the summertime, the price goes down. Job layoffs in town means there's less disposable income for families, so there's less demand for babysitters because we can't afford to go out. So if there's less demand for babysitters, again, we all start competing with each other for any job, and the price goes down. And this is not a great example because electric cars aren't necessarily energy efficient all the time. But in theory, more people convert to electric cars, and that in theory decreases the demand for gasoline. And let's say all the cars go electric and we no longer have a need for gasoline anymore. The price of gasoline is going to go down because we don't have a demand for it. Any questions on that? I know I'm beating that up, and it probably makes perfect sense when we're talking about it and when we're looking at it, but it's one of those things that can easily trip us up when we start thinking about you have to start thinking about what's in the middle of the fulcrum, and start there. What's in the middle of the fulcrum? What's the question asking? Am I asking about the price going up? What happens to? Am I talking about supply going up or down, or am I talking about demand going up? What's the fulcrum? What am I starting with? And how does that get affected? And hopefully then it'll stay clear. Okay. So in our last couple minutes here, and again, you can go back over and not grass because I'm going to run out of time. A lot of terms. Difference between price and cost. Even I misuse that term constantly. The price is what consumers pay. Like the official economic definition is the price is what consumers pay. What's the price of eggs these days? Meaning when I go to the grocery store, what am I going to pay for eggs? We often use the term interchangeably with cost. What do eggs cost these days? Well, the cost of eggs is what it costs to produce them. So it costs a farmer, let's say, 50 cents an egg to produce them, and the price he sells them for is 60 cents an egg. So he's going to make a profit of 10 cents, right? But the cost is what it costs for me to produce something. The price is what I either sell them for or what I pay for them, depending on the producer or the consumer. The cost to the grocery store is their cost was the 60 cents that it cost them to buy from the price that they paid was buying from the farmer of 60 cents. Their cost of the eggs includes all of the overhead. So selling eggs costs them, let's say 70 cents, their personal cost, and the price they sell them for is $1. So hopefully that makes a difference. The cost is what it costs to produce. Price is what we sell it for, what we buy it for. And really, that middleman, for the retailers, it's really not about the price they pay. That's their cost because they're not the end consumer. The price is really about the end consumer. Just so you know. Yeah. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. Think about price makers, price takers. You can read that in the book. Again, if you have one company or a handful of companies that can basically set a price because they have so much clout, they have so much power, that basically if there's only one factory in town, they can set the price for labor. Or Boeing has to take what the government offers basically for an airplane because they don't have it. There's no other competition type thing. So price taker, if I'm an employee and there's only one worker in town, I take whatever price they give me. Talk about price discrimination, like airlines, they can charge the same price for the same seat or different prices for the same seat on an airplane. Legally, price discrimination is charging different prices for the same thing. And we'll come back to price. We'll come back to that another time. And it is legal. We're going to talk about the diamond water paradox. Don't let me forget to talk about the diamond water paradox next week. Oh, and I do need to come back to all kinds of price elasticity and stickiness and Noah's Castle and all this. Lots of good stuff that I haven't gotten to yet. And market failures and oligopolies versus monopsonies versus oligopsonies. And there's one other. We need to know those. You can look those up and memorize them. And what is a market failure and how taxes. Okay, so we're going to go there. And we'll come back to Ludwig von Mises next week, and we'll jump in. We'll start with Noah's Castle next week, I think, okay? But make sure you watch Mary Poppins the videos from Mary Poppins. I believe there is another one. Oh, Trading Places. No, I don't think Trading Places is next week. Let me get back over there real quick. Hudsucker Proxy. Let me just double confirm what homework is for this week. There we are. Hold on one moment. This is week 7. Just want to confirm if there's anything. Any other questions for me about what homework is? Do not bother. Do not go ahead and take unit quiz. I mean, you can, but we'll talk a little bit more about Unit 6 before you have to take the quiz. Online resources for week 7. Hudsucker Proxy. Oh, maybe it's not Mary Poppins. Maybe Mary Poppins is not this week. Nope, I guess not. Or maybe we'll watch it in class. Maybe I decided we watch it in class. Anyway, Noah's Castle, Unit 7, Penny Candy, all the things. Anything else? And I can't see you anymore. I lost you, and it's time. And where is my Adobe Connect? Okay. Nope. Have a great week, and we will see you then next week. I was disjointed in the end. I lost my train of thought, I guess. I'm done. I'm just done. Have a fabulous week.